So I phoned Central Command and the police, and I said, I don't think this is acceptable. I'm an Anglican clergyman. I'm planning to come down and protest this illegal protest. And they said, well, Mr. Leach, if you come down, we can't guarantee your safety. We're warning all the Jewish community to stay out of the city. And if you come down and try and do anything, we will arrest you in order to prevent a breach of the peace.
Wow.
So being an Anglican pastor, I've been running churches for 30 years, and I'm a very pious and spiritual person. I hung up the phone and I thought to myself, bugger that.
Yeah. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Monday Movement podcast, where we have authentic conversations with interesting leaders who feel called into the marketplace. I have a fascinating person, good friend of mine, who has launched out into a very contentious area. So we have Mark Leach, who is the co-founder of Never Again Is Now, and he's encouraging Australian values and coming against some of the anti-Semitism that's rising up in Australia and indeed around the world. Mark, so good to have you here. Thank you so much for coming down. I know you're crazy busy right now, so thank you for joining us. I noticed on your Facebook page you said that I'm a gloriously wonderful yet tragically flawed spiritual being having an embodied experience. Do you want to unpack that for us a little?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thank you for your time and attention. And hopefully you'll get something out of this that will be helpful. One of the key things about life is we have to understand who we are, what in Christian theology we call our anthropology. And so the Bible teaches paradoxically that we are glorious beings. Every single human being is made in the image of God, and nothing we do can erase that image. And that image is true in all of us, whether we're in utero or whether we're in a dementia ward at the end of our lives, and everything in between, and irrespective of gender and ethnicity and culture and race and so on. And that's true of us. But we're also tragically flawed. We're also a mess. Like, we have the capacity just, as Francis Spufford, an English theologian and apologist, said, he defines sin as the ineluctable tendency to F things up. Pardon me, I edited that out. And so that says we're tragically flawed. So I'm so aware that I'm glorious and wonderful and amazing and extraordinary. And every morning I wake up, I should look in the mirror and go, I'm an incredible being. But I should also fall on my knees and say, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner, because I can just stuff things up in extraordinary ways. And that's the human experience. And that's the paradox of our existence. Yeah. And that I'm a spiritual being, that this is what defines us. We're not, but I'm a spiritual being who's embodied. So we're not what in church history we call Gnostics, who believe in that we're just basically the spark of divinity caught up in this terrible, evil, flawed thing. But I am fundamentally spiritual, and everybody is, but we're also embodied, and all of that matters. So then the Christian life is about living with all of those realities, glorious, tragically flawed, spiritual, and embodied, and then finding the way to be like Jesus in the middle of all of that.
Love that. It's the paradox of the human experience, isn't it? Fearfully and wonderfully made, yet fundamentally flawed. Yeah. I love that. Can you tell us about how you came to know Jesus and follow him?
So look, my mother was a German Jew, fled Germany, fled the Holocaust in 1938, left Frankfurt with her parents, ended up as refugees in southern Africa. She married my father. Mum became a doctor, married my father, who was a Catholic background, white South African guy. Both were secular. My father was certainly not a practicing Catholic. He was a mercenary and a diamond smuggler, and smuggled precious gems, was just a career criminal, and so not particularly religious.
Yes.
Or, Christ-like in his character.
Yep.
And Mum was a secular Jew. Most German Jews were highly secular and assimilated. So they married, and I was brought up, as I say, with a Jewish mother and a Catholic father. I had double the guilt, and but no real encounter with God. And but from my Jewish background, there's the sense that and the Catholic background, there was a God, but this God wasn't particularly involved in the world at all. In fact, living in the shadow of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, which was my experience, we were always aware of this. We'd lost everything. My family had lost everything in the war. God wasn't involved. And then if you take the Catholic side, there was this view that if God did get involved, it was to smack you over the hand and tell you not to do it. So God was uninvolved or punitive. And then I wasn't going to church anywhere. We had a long history of troubles and trauma through Zambia, where I was born, and then Rhodesia through the Civil War, and then we moved to South Africa. So in Cape Town, and I was invited to go to a youth group by a friend at school. And so I went to the youth group because it had the potential to fulfill a very deep need that I had in my life at the moment, at that time, which was girls. And mostly to meet them. I was at a big boys' school in Cape Town. So I went along to meet girls, and I met God. I also met girls, but I met God. And both are wonderful. And I met God and I went to this. I'd never been to a Protestant. I had nothing to do with Protestants. And so this was an Anglican youth group. And they used weird language. They said, we can have a personal relationship with God. And that just did not compute for me. And they said, then they used even weirder language. They said, you need to invite Jesus into your heart. And I thought that was very peculiar because my mother was a doctor. I'd grown up with a fairly good working knowledge of anatomy and physiology and medical journals scattered around the house. And I'm like, how do you get Jesus into your heart? Like that language made no sense. And then they used an even weirder phrase, and they said, Mark, you really need to be born again. And again, my basic knowledge of anatomy, much like Nicodemus in John 3, I was like, well, how can a man having been born once be born again? Like it's pretty much meant to be for human beings a one-way passage, right? Like I was like, but over time, I became convinced that there was a God who loved me, and that this God had revealed himself in Jesus, and that if I said yes to Jesus, I could actually have a personal connection with this God. I could be forgiven. I could be given hope. And so I eventually said yes to Jesus it was in the mid-'80s, a big evangelistic Billy Graham-style rally in Cape Town in May 1985. And this guy preached. It was at a musical, an evangelistic musical. I'd gone along because a girl I liked was singing in it. And again, girls and God. And and the guy had an altar call at the end. And he said it was a stadium. This big theater was in 3 sections. He said, anyone in this section? I was sitting in the middle section. Anyone in this section who wants to say yes to Jesus, come down the front now. And then he came to the middle section. He said, anyone here who wants to come to Jesus, come down the front now. And I sat there and I thought, I knew I needed to do it, but I was so scared that if I did it, nothing would happen, and that I'd be made fun of by my friends and family. And so I sat there, and then he moved on to the next section. And as he did that, I remember vividly praying, and I said, God, if I ever get a chance to become a Christian again, please give me the courage to do it. And no sooner had I said that than he said, and now's your last chance. If there's anyone in the building who wants to become a Christian and a follower of Jesus, now's your chance. And I felt myself propelled out of my seat, just surrounded with love and healing and the presence of God, tears streaming down my eyes, just carried down the front, like the most extraordinary encounter with God. And I said yes to Jesus, and everything that the weird things people had said seemed to come true, that God entered my life and started the work of change. Some changes happen instantly, and others are still very much a work in progress. But that's how I came to Jesus. That's how I came to God. And I think, some people come to God in very gentle, unremarkable ways. Some of us need experiences like that because it's going to be hard to sustain faith.
Totally.
I got, my father was extraordinarily unimpressed. He was in jail at the time, and he used to roundly abuse me and mock me for my faith. And my mother felt like a failure as a Jew, and failed to raise me as a Catholic, failed to raise me as a Jew, and I'm this crazy Protestant born-again Christian. So it was and over all the course of the years, that experience of God has been pivotal. And I've gone, I've never doubted. Yeah.
So you and I are similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
My great grandmother, my mother's side, was Jewish. So again, technically,
Mazel
I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
So with a nose like this, I can go into most synagogues, not be questioned.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a link there.
Yeah.
And then was raised in a secular environment and came to the Lord later in life, early 20s, and a radical conversion as well. So we're like brothers, Mark.
I think so. And, it's amazing. Like, God hasn't given up on the Jewish people at all. And he loves all of humanity. But, the gospel is to the Jew first and then the Gentile. So I just find enormous joy in having those two parts of my identity combined. So I say to people now, I identify as 100% Jewish and 100% Christian and just bad at maths.
Love it. I love it. That's great. Because we are really grafted into the Jewish root. We often forget that, I think, as Christians, that that's, the fullness of experience has come out of being grafted into the original calling of God.
Yeah, Christianity is Jewish.
Absolutely.
And so
Jesus is Jewish, Bible's Jewish, written by Jewish people too. Yes, etc.
So and it's wonderful that the people can be involved, and it's now a global family, and we just need to keep reminding Gentile Christians, as Paul does right through the book of Romans, don't be arrogant. Don't think God's abandoned his people. This gives a richness to us. So
totally.
Anyway, so that's the.
So, Mark, you were an Anglican priest for some considerable time. I know you went through some commercial things first, and then ended up in the as an Anglican priest. And then recently, you've made a radical move. Some might say a radical move from the Reverend Mark Leach out of the Anglican Church and into running Never Again Is Now. Do you want to just take us through the thinking behind that and what sort of compelled you to make that change?
Yeah. Well, I've been concerned for decades about the direction of our culture and civilization, and in particular the kind of the attacks we're facing from the radical left and from global jihadist Islam. And as a Jew and as a Christian, these things concern me greatly. And so what happened was on October the 7th, 2023, as I'm sure your viewers all know, there was this horrific attack on Israel.
Yep.
And I sort of watched that unfold live on Twitter, which was deeply traumatic and disturbing. And then that was the Saturday. Then on the Monday, I got a phone call Monday morning from my daughter Freya, who's at the University of Sydney, saying, "Dad, the crazy left are planning a rally in the city centre to protest Israel and support Palestine." And I thought to myself, that just seems wrong. This was the day when the Opera House sails were supposed to be lit up in blue and white. The city we're supposed to all be in solidarity and mourning with Israel. And instead, the forces of hatred, the jihadists, were planning to occupy the city center, and the police were warning the Jewish community to stay out of the city. So I phoned Central Command and the police, and I said, I don't think this is acceptable. I'm an Anglican clergyman. I'm planning to come down and protest this illegal protest. And they said, "Well, Mr. Leach, if you come down, we can't guarantee your safety. We're warning all the Jewish community to stay out of the city. And if you come down and try and do anything, we will arrest you in order to prevent a breach of the peace." Wow. So being an Anglican pastor, I've been running churches for 30 years, and I'm a very pious and spiritual person. I hung up the phone and I thought to myself, bugger that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't, as a Christian, as an Australian, as a pastor, we can't at this moment in history, before the blood has even dried in southern Israel, they're still chasing terrorists around the south. Yeah. We can't cede the center of our city to a bunch of people who are going to call for the ethnic cleansing of the Jewish people who hate Israel, who hate the Jewish community. And I thought, and we can't just let that go unnoticed and give them our city center. So I went down, took my squash bag, and I took an Israeli flag rolled up, and I put a clerical shirt on. I looked all religious. And the rally started in Town Hall, between the Anglican Cathedral and the Town Hall. I stood on the steps of our cathedral on private property, watched these guys with all their hatred, carrying on, screaming. I heard a group of young guys say, "Kill the Jews." And at that point, I took an Israeli flag out and I stood at the back of the crowd and I waved an Israeli flag. And I thought, I'm going to take a stand for Western civilization, for decency, for love, for life. I'm going to stand for Australia. I'm going to stand with the Jewish community and say, we can't allow this. We will not allow hatred to grow on our streets. So everyone turned and looked at me, all the cameras, and a whole bunch of keffiyeh-wrapped thugs then chased me out of the square. I ran up Bathurst Street, ended up hiding behind a police van while they dispersed the crowd. That was the rally that infamously ended up at the Opera House, and we all know how evil that was.
Sure.
So out of that, it became clear to me that we needed to mobilize the Christians of Australia to stand with the Jewish community. You know, in 1930s in Germany, about 20% of the Christians supported Hitler, about 20% opposed Hitler. The middle 60% just sang their songs, went to church, and hoped it would all go away while their neighbors were carted off to gas chambers. So I thought to myself, as a pastor, as a Christian, we have a responsibility and an obligation to our Jewish community and to Australia more broadly to wake up the church, to say, we are facing real evil on our streets. The Jewish community are facing real evil, and we must stand with them. So we started four of us together we said, let's run a rally in the city of Sydney to led by the Christians, to bring everybody together. So that was in February last year. We had 10,000 people in the Domain. And then we thought, why don't we do this in every capital city? And next thing we know, we've started a national movement around the country, politicians, faith leaders, people of all religions and none, gathering together to push back the hate and say, never again is now. Yeah. We will make sure the Jewish community is safe and secure and loved in Australia. Yeah. And so that became clear as last year unfolded that I couldn't keep doing that and running a local church. So in September last year, I went full-time with Never Again Is Now, and building this movement of reform and protection for the Jewish people. And
good on you, Mark. It's fantastic. Always like when other people put their head above the parapet and take a few hits for the team. Yeah. Very brave thing to do. You obviously felt compelled to do that. One of the things that's distressed me, I think, over this whole time is a lot of Christians that I know that a little bit sucked into maybe the suicidal empathy side of things. When you see some of the outcome of Gaza and the kids getting killed, etc. It's not unreasonable to have an empathetic reaction to that, but not looking at the reasons why those kids are there, the response. War's a terrible thing. Yeah. But a lot of Christians sort of got sucked into the left-wing media, Hamas propaganda, and are really against this whole thing and seeing Israel as the sort of evil one in the equation. What's your experience of Christians in the Christian perspective?
Look, the impulse to side with the vulnerable and the marginalized and the oppressed is a deeply Christian impulse. Yeah. So the left is deeply Christian. That empathy is a Christian value. It's not no other culture has that. Like every other culture basically values strength and power and domination. And as Christians, we follow the way of Jesus and the way of the Hebrew scriptures. We care for the poor and the marginalized. The problem is that that impulse has been manipulated by the sort of neo-Marxist framing of identity politics, of a simple oppressor-oppressed narrative that the whole world can be divided into these two categories. So in the Christian world and in the West, in a place like Australia, we've been primed for 40, 50 years. We've been told the whole world can be simply understood in these terms. Yeah. And then history and justice and God's purposes move forward as the oppressor is overthrown by the oppressed and we're all liberated and free. It's straight out of Marx. His categories were, capital and labor. Then in the post-Second World War, a guy called Frantz Fanon, who was an Algerian psychotherapist writing in France. He wrote this book called The Wretched of the Earth, and what he introduced and popularized was the idea it's no longer just capital and labor, it's actually now the colonial oppressor and the oppressed. And the way then history moves forward, a la Marx, is through revolution. And Fanon explicitly said violence is the necessary and inevitable and only way that the oppressed can resist. And then that was taken up by the radical Muslims and the Muslim Brotherhood who are looking for a resurgence of Islam. They married this together with the oppressed narrative, the post-colonial narrative. And then that's been taught and layered into all of our thinking in the Western world, our education. Yeah. So Christians are primed for this because we naturally go, we side with oppression's a bad thing.
Yep.
That was then layered on to Israel. And so very simplistically, with almost no historic background and understanding of the complexity of the Middle East, the Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood propaganda arm of Qatar, Al Jazeera, the ABC, who repeated this, were able to very simplistically say to people, look, the problem in Gaza is really simple. Israel, colonial settler oppressors, Gazans, Palestinians, innocent, plucky Palestinians fighting this evil force. If you want to be a good person, if you want to be a good Christian, you must side with the Gazans and the Palestinians. And of course, then Israel and anti-Zionism actually becomes a cover for anti-Semitism.
Right.
And anti-Semitism, the hatred of the Jewish people, is this primal hatred that has bubbled away for 3,500 years. Christians have been complicit in it. You don't have to scratch too deeply in anyone, and you will discover what I believe is a spiritual and demonic opposition to God's chosen people, the Jewish folk.
Yeah.
And so I have been distressed and dismayed at the historic ignorance and the suicidal empathy, to quote Gad Saad, and the latent anti-Semitism of many followers of Jesus, including not a small number of my peers in Anglican ministry. And that is deeply distressing because it's unchristian and it's destructive.
It is. I think it only can really be explained from a spiritual perspective. If you think of the alliance of the far left and the jihadists, and it's just an unholy alliance, but all seems to be just anti-Israel.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think when in the sort of political activism grassroots space that we're in with Never Again Is Now, that's a conversation most Australians don't get because we're so thoroughly secular. But it is. There's how else do you explain it? I think what I say to some of my Jewish friends, I say the existence of anti-Semitism is proof that we live in a spiritual universe, that there's spiritual evil that animates it. Yeah. And then I say the existence of the people of Israel, of the Jewish folk, is proof that there's a good God who's faithful to his promises, because it's in the face of that evil and persistent persecution, how have the Jews survived? And how are you and I sitting here together? I mean, that's just, it's God, right? Like,
absolutely. We
should not be here given what's been arrayed against us.
100%.
Yeah, so it is. It's deeply, and it's demonic in my view. Yeah. Because the way to hurt someone, like, I don't know, you've got kids, I've got kids. You can attack me and I can cope with that. But if the most painful thing you can do for me is to attack my kids, hurt my kids.
Yeah.
So you go, how does Satan going to attack God? How do you inflict the most pain on God?
Yeah.
You attack those he loves. Who's the apple of God's eye? It's the people of Israel.
Exactly.
Attack God's kids.
Yep.
You hurt God.
Yep. Golda Meir famously said that there'll only be peace in the Middle East when the Arabs love their children more than they hate Israel.
Yeah. Look, it's complicated.
It is complicated. It is massively complicated.
But it is, and I have to be. It's very careful. Yeah, I think Islam, in its founding documents, the Quran, the Sunnah, the Hadiths, has a strand of virulent anti-Semitism, right from Muhammad's practice and the massacre of the Jews at Khaybar and so on. So anti-Semitism is a feature, not a bug, of Islamic theology and of Arab cultural practice for 1,400 years. Which is not to say that every Muslim is anti-Semitic,
yes,
but on the buffet, on the array of options that you can legitimately take as a Muslim, there's a section on that buffet table that's laden up with stuff that is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, it's the uncomfortable truth, isn't
it? But most Muslims, thank God, don't eat from that end of the buffet table. They're wonderful, beautiful human beings, and Islam can be practiced authentically without anti-Semitism.
Yeah. We've seen a bit of that, I think, in the discourse in the Middle East since all this has happened, with the Abraham Accords kind of got put on pause, but there's a lot of language around the re-engagement in that. Some states, the only hard border in Gaza was Egypt.
Yes.
So I think there is some dichotomy in thinking around Middle East, and particularly the issue around Gaza and the Palestinian problem.
Yeah. So just before Christmas, Freya and I we did a video interview with Amjad Tahir, who's a geopolitical strategist from the UAE, from Dubai.
Been very vocal.
Yeah, he's amazing, right? And so really what we need is leaders within the Islamic community, and there are people like Amjad who stand up and say, no, we have to make peace with Israel. Yeah. And there's no space in 21st century Islam for racial hatred of the Jews or the Christians. And we have to find a way to live together. Now, my view is that the best way is through Jesus, who is the peacemaker, and Christian people being peacemakers. Yeah. And so we've got to find people with whom we can make peace. The problem the Israelis have with Gaza is the entire population, almost without exception, has been radicalized over the last 20 years since Israel pulled out. Yeah. The charter of Hamas and their explicit goal, they exist to eradicate the state of Israel and to drive the Jews out of the Middle East. Yeah. That's it. And they've built the entire city and population around that goal. So that is a massive problem. So what do you do with that? Yeah. I've never met an Israeli, this isn't to say they don't exist, I've never met an Israeli who doesn't actually just want peace. Yeah. They're not interested in making war. And we know this since 1947. They just want to live at peace. Yeah. And the Israeli army, the IDF, is made up of, it's reservists, it's kids like my kids' age, your kids' age. And they're just ordinary largely Western liberal values people wanting to live at peace. But they're facing an enemy who are just so radicalized, so committed to their destruction, which is why I think Trump's plan is an interesting and good one, and possibly it's the best solution I've heard at the moment. So
that's a whole wild thing.
Throw that out there.
You and I are going to do the Lead Well, Live Well podcast as well. Yeah. And we're going to get a little bit more into some of the nitty gritty around that, which I'm looking forward to. The audience here is mainly Christian, who feel called into the marketplace. If they want to help, if they want to connect with Never Again Is Now, how do they do that?
Go to our website, neveragainisnow.com.au, join the movement and start to get educated, start to understand what's going on, and start to tell the better story. So our theory of change, the way we are going to ensure the safety and security and prosperity of the Jewish community in Australia is by renewing our commitment to Western civilization that is built on the better story of Christianity and Judaism. So understand that better story, live the better story, advocate for it, be in a good sense, be proud of this culture that we have, be protective of it, and work together as Christians. To be a follower of Jesus in this season, you can't just sit in the church, say your prayers, sing your songs, and hope everything's going to be okay. Totally. It's not. We have to, for the good, not just of us and our current population, but our kids and our grandkids, we have to go into our civilization, into our culture, into our world and say, we want to order it around the ways of Jesus and the ways of our culture. So get involved. Invite me to come in and speak in your church. Invite me or my daughter or one of our speakers. We have a whole list of Jewish folk who would love to come in and share in your church or your business about what it's like to be Jewish in Australia and in the world at the moment. And we'll come in together with them, tell the story, be confident, speak up, vote up. Yep. And get involved in civic society. Yeah,
the time of being quiet in the corner is pretty much over now, I think.
I think it is. And the time for just hoping someone else will fight the fight's over. We know what happened in Germany when Christians were quiet and did nothing. And we have the answer. We can both tell the truth fearlessly, even when it's incredibly uncomfortable, but do it with extraordinary love and say, you know what? Jesus calls us to lay our lives down, even for our enemies. So to say we'll sacrificially serve the common good of Australia by advocating for truth, for freedom, for justice, for peace here.
So good. I love that. Mark, you've got a lot of passion. You obviously feel called into this and out from the running the church.
Yep.
Traditionally, running the church is the ministry, and anything outside of that is not. The Monday movement is really around that wherever we are as a Christian, that's where we're called to, and then we should think of that as a ministry. Is that your understanding of being sort of called out of where you are into doing something completely different?
Yeah, I've never understood the distinction between clergy and laity, or Sunday is super special and the rest of the world is not. I mean, partly it's my Jewish background. I had the privilege of not growing up in a Protestant church that fostered those divisions. I just think figure out what you're good at doing, figure out where the needs are, and with God, go ahead and meet the needs with whatever capacity you have. Yeah. For me, that meant leading and pastoring and caring for people in the local church until such time as it meant not doing that. And it's all equally valid. I'll tell you the thing I've most enjoyed about my deep immersion in the Jewish community, again, over the last 15 months, is how they work together and support each other in their economic enterprises and in business and in life. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. And they value and honor people who give it a go, who set up businesses, because you had no choice, right? My Jewish family in South Africa set up a business. They had no education, grew it into a very substantial enterprise, employed lots and lots of people. So I would say to anyone listening, work out what it is you're good at, or just not bad at. Look at what the needs are in the world and go out and meet those needs, and then work together. Christians in business in particular we need productive people. We need enterprises that employ people, that create value, that innovate. And Christians should be doing that and trading with each other and employing each other and supporting each other. Absolutely. And that's monumentally important.
Love that. Well, Mark, thank you for what you're doing. And God bless you in your latest endeavours. And I just hope that the church in the broadest context would rise up and help you do what you're doing and support you in every way possible. So thank you so much for coming today. It's an important message. And so people out there, just make sure you share this message with all your friends. It's such an important message for a time like this. We need to be salt and light wherever we can be. Thank you, Mark, for coming today.
It's a great pleasure, and may God bless you in your endeavors. It's wonderful to be part of them and to have watched you over so many years, helping Christians live well in the marketplace and serve Jesus wherever they are. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mark. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us at the Monday Movement Vodcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you want to know more about what we do, you can find us at mondaymovement.com.